This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jill Newbronner, and here are tonight's top stories from East Asia. China reaching far and wide on issues of cooperation as President Xi Jinping visits Brazil's capital, Brasilia. The two countries expected to sign agreements on various sectors from trade to space. ASEAN defense ministers are gathering for a meeting in Vientiane at a time when maritime tensions with China remain at an all-time high. Media tycoon Jimmy Lai takes the witness stand for the first time, denying any attempt to influence a foreign policy towards China and Hong Kong. He is on trial for foreign collusion under Hong Kong's national security law. Beijing assessing the effects of its recent stimulus measures, with the People's Bank of China keeping major benchmark lending rates unchanged. China is playing host to the World Internet Conference in Wuhan, where President Xi Jinping has urged efforts to embrace the digital trends. The Chinese President Xi Jinping is in the capital of Brazil, Brasilia, fresh off a warm reception at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. Now, he's due to hold talks with his Brazilian counterpart, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Mr. Xi and his Brazilian counterpart are expected to sign agreements on a wide range of topics, from aerospace to energy. The official visit is Beijing's latest diplomatic flex in the so-called Global South, taking place just 2 months before Donald Trump's return to the White House. Mr. Xi's Brazil visit is coming at a time of great global uncertainty, with wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. Both China and Brazil have sought to mediate in the Ukraine war while declining to sanction fellow BRICS member Russia. We have more now with Deborah Wong, who's joining us live from Hong Kong. Deborah, what's on the agenda for President Xi and President Lula?
So both countries, both China and Brazil, are marking 50 years of diplomatic ties this year. And President Xi has said in an article ahead of his Brazil visit that he will be looking to further enhance ties with Brazil in terms of promoting strategic developments. And both China and Brazil must also work together with the Global South to promote a fairer global governance system. Now, China is attempting to reshape a US-led post-war order with strategic alliances, and it sees Brazil as a key partner to all that because it's a major economy in South America. And Brazil, on the other hand, has indicated that it will be pushing for increasing exports of higher value added products. And that's going to be important because it's one of the reasons why Brazil has decided against joining China's Belt and Road Initiative for now. And Brazil said it will instead be looking for more synergy within the Belt Road Initiative and also elevate its economic partnership with China. So we can expect conversations during the meeting on how they can be on more equitable footing. And, despite all that, Brazil remains China's largest trading partner in Latin America. So we can also expect them to deepen work in trade, digital economy, and more significantly, political trust.
Now, the meeting comes at a time of change in leadership in the U.S. What does China feel that it can offer Brazil in this area?
Investments, in fact, lots of it. President Xi just recently inaugurated South America's first Chinese-funded port in Peru last week, and that's expected to speed up trade between Latin America and Asia. And observers are saying that China has actually seized untapped opportunities in a region that's historically been overlooked by the U.S. But now the U.S. is taking notice of it. U.S. officials, in fact, have warned Latin America to be vigilant of Chinese investments after the port in Peru was inaugurated. Both superpowers are competing for influence in Latin America, and Brazil, being one of the major economies in the region, will also no doubt be closely watched. And then there's also a matter of security interests. Both China and Brazil have attempted to mediate in the Ukraine war, and they've also declined sanctions. They've decided against sanctioning Russia at the same time. So China, Brazil, and Russia are part of BRICS, and that is a bloc that's created to serve as a conduit to the West, and among several priorities, try to reduce dependence on the US dollar. And with Trump 2.0 coming, he has said he will be going down hard on global trade. He has said that he will be launching 20% of tariffs on all foreign made goods. So China's offering of trade alliances and also deepening its relationship with the global south will, in the face of all these protectionist policies, will no doubt be attractive to the region. Back to you.
All right, Deborah, leave it there for now. Thank you very much, Deborah Wong, joining us from Hong Kong. Well, the U.S. is taking part in critical talks before the end of the Biden administration. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is in the Laos capital of Vientiane for security talks with ASEAN defense ministers as Washington seeks to give assurances to the regional bloc ahead of the second Trump presidency.
This is a critical responsibility for the region and the world at a time that's very challenging, and you have made it look easy.
The U.S. diplomat is also reiterating Washington's stance against China's increasingly assertive behavior in the East and South China Seas. In the same vein, the Lao defense minister says he hopes members could stay united in challenging times.
ของกองประชุมในครั้งนี้อย่างสังสรรค์มีบรรยากาศและมีความเป็นเอกภาพเพื่อให้แต่กองประชุมของพวกเราครั้งนี้สำเร็จผลตามระดับขัดมาที่ได้วางไว้เพื่อเป็นพื้นฐานให้แก่การสืบต่อในการร่วมมือทางด้านหน่วยงานป้องกันศาสตร์ของอาเซียนพวกเรา
Well, the ASEAN members are convening at a time when altercations with Beijing in the South China Sea have become more frequent. China has sent patrol vessels to the areas that Indonesia and Malaysia claim as exclusive economic zones. ASEAN members and Beijing have pledged to negotiate a code of conduct to govern behavior in the sea by 2026, but they've not made much progress over whether the pact should be binding. The World Internet Conference has opened in China with delegates from over 130 countries. Governance and artificial intelligence are key themes at a time when various sectors are raising concerns while embracing AI practices. At the recently concluded G20 summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping had said AI should, quote, not be a game of rich countries. Now, he called for international governance and global cooperation on AI. In a video message to the conference, he also urged attendees to embrace the digital, internet-based and smart development trends. Well, let's get CNA's Tan Yuguan to weigh in more from the conference in Wuhan. Yuguan, it has been a decade since China held its first World Internet Conference. How has today's event changed to accommodate a very challenging domestic and global environment?
Well, indeed, it's a very challenging environment for China these days. There's ongoing U.S. sanctions on the country, and it's also facing the prospect of a Trump White House. President Trump, as you recall, was the president that started the trade war with China. Now, it's of course quite a sharp contrast to the peaceful scenery that you see behind me. It's worth mentioning that this ancient town of Wuzhen is the venue of the conference since 2014. It's an inspired choice because the canals that you see here are actually connected to the Grand Canal. And for many dynasties, it has been a critical artery connecting Beijing in the north to Hangzhou in the south. Just like the internet is now the artery of the modern world. Now, it's not without irony that the World Conference on the Internet is actually taking place behind the Great Firewall of China, which of course gates keep this great artery for our modern world. And many of the internet apps that our viewers are familiar with, like Google, YouTube, will not be accessible here without VPN. And to that end, organizers actually issued these cards for journalists, right, so that they could access these apps through a special network without VPN. Now, interestingly, tech giants Alibaba and Ant Group are among today's sponsors. If you recall, Ant Group has just emerged about a year ago from an 18-month-long crackdown by Beijing on regulatory crackdown. Now, along with other tech giants, Tencent and Baidu, these three companies were fined hundreds of millions of dollars for antitrust behaviors, as well as violations on rules on customer protection. Indeed, governance of the internet is one of the themes mentioned multiple times throughout today in this morning's keynote address. For example, Chinese Premier Ding Xuexiang called for better governance of the internet through multilateral engagements while respecting what he calls each country's digital sovereignty.
完善全球治理，实现网络空间命运与共，坚持真正的多边主义，践行共商共建共享的全球治理观。通过战略沟通增进互信，通过协商对话解决分歧，尊重各国网络主权，深化全球互联网领域治理合作，增强新兴市场国家和发展中国家的代表性和话语权，推动构建更加公平合理、开放包容、安全稳定、富有生机的活力的网络空间。
Vice Premier Ding is, of course, the first-ranked Vice Premier of China, and he's also the sixth-ranked member of the Politburo Standing Committee of the Communist Party of China. Now, in a further sign of the emphasis that the Chinese government is placing on this conference, today's opening was hosted by China's Minister for Cyberspace Administration. President Xi Jinping, who is in Brazil, also issued a video message.
我们应当把握数字化、网络化、智能化发展大势，把创新作为第一动力，把安全作为底线要求，把普惠作为价值追求，加快推动网络空间创新发展、安全发展、普惠发展。携手迈进更加美好的数字未来。
So Yuguan, since AI is a theme for this year's event, what are China's AI ambitions?
Well, as early as 2017, China has issued a grand plan for its AI ambitions. To a large extent, it has succeeded in its plan. China is now widely considered number 2 behind the United States as far as AI is concerned, with the rest of the pack far behind. Now, China also publishes more AI papers than any other country in the world today. And that's even more than the United States. However, that said, the United States does have more widely cited AI papers. Now, being cited is widely used as a yardstick for quality. Now, China has, however, a handful of AI chatbots. They, however, also do lag behind their US counterparts like ChatGPT and Gemini. But AI is, however, being applied in China in quite a wide variety of ways already. Banks, for example, are using them to cope with customer queries. There are AI-powered trucks making deliveries, for example, and AI cameras, AI-enabled cameras tabulating your bill at canteen-style food stalls. Now, China does have a huge market to support a wide variety of applications for AI, and insiders say it is pretty strong in AI applications, just a bit behind when it comes to fundamental research on AI, like, for example, large language model research. With AI all the rage here, it comes as no surprise that tomorrow many of the forums will feature AI as a topic. Jill?
Thanks, Yuguan. Well, that was CNA's Tan Yuguan reporting live from Wuzhen. Now, China has slammed Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai, describing him as an agent and lackey for anti-Chinese forces, as Lai takes the witness stand in a Hong Kong court for the first time in his foreign collusion trial. The 76-year-old earlier told the court he did not attempt to influence the foreign policy of other countries, including the US, towards China and Hong Kong. Lai also says his now-shuttered newspaper represented the city's core values and championed democracy and freedom. He has pleaded not guilty to 2 charges of conspiracy to collude with foreign forces and a charge of conspiracy to publish seditious material. Scores of Lai supporters were seen braving the rain to queue for seats in the public gallery. Lai's case is one of the most prominent prosecuted under the national security law imposed by Beijing in 2020. Western countries and rights groups have demanded his release. He has been in jail for nearly 4 years now. The media mogul was first convicted of unauthorized assembly in 2021 for his participation in the protests that roiled the city. He was then found guilty of fraud in October 2022 and was given a sentence of 5 years and 9 months. Lai's trial comes a day after 45 anti-government activists were sentenced to jail after being found guilty of conspiracy to commit subversion and also under the national security law. Both cases have drawn a wave of international condemnation. China has hit back, asking Western countries not to interfere in the territorial affairs. Coming up on East Asia tonight, the IMF cuts South Korea's economic outlook as trade headwinds grow. Plus a surge in 7&I shares following reports of a deal to take the retail giant private could soon be completed. Welcome back as we bring in Henry with the business news. Henry, Chinese commercial banks keeping key lending rates unchanged this month.
Yes, indeed, Joe. So it had been a widely expected move after lenders slashed the rates by higher than expected margins last month to revive economic activity. The one-year loan prime rate, which is a benchmark for corporate loans, is held at 3.1%. The 5-year rate also stays at 3.6%. It's a reference rate for pricing most mortgages. Both key rates were reduced by 25 basis points in the October fixing. That followed a string of cuts in China's other key rates in September as Beijing rolled out sweeping stimulus measures to revive growth momentum. That included fiscal boosts and property market support. Concerns around the yuan's stability was also a consideration at this month's fixing. The Chinese currency has come under fresh pressure after Donald Trump's return to the White House. Since the November 5th U.S. election, the yuan has fallen around 2%. It's now trading at about 7.2 to the dollar. Well, China's equity markets ending the day in the green, but caution over steady lending rates capped gains. The Shanghai Composite Index closed today's session up by 0.7%, while Shenzhen Component Index is up by about 0.8%. In Hong Kong, the benchmark Hang Seng Index up by less than 0.3%. While the IMF has lowered its forecast for South Korea's economic growth amid rising trade headwinds facing the export-reliant country. Growth projection for this year was moderated to 2.2% from 2.5%, while 2025's forecast was revised to 2% from 2.2%. And the chief of the Korea mission at the IMF says risks for Seoul include a slowdown among trading partners as well as rising commodity prices due to conflicts in the Middle East. Meantime, Bloomberg analysts have also highlighted the possible impact of U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on the South Korean economy. Mr. Trump sees his country's trade deficits as a major concern and raising uncertainty for South Korea as it's among the top 10 nations with the largest gains against the U.S. Mr. Trump's planned tariffs are likely to threaten South Korean exports, which could fall as much as 55% by 2028. The IMF has also advised the country to continue normalizing monetary policy to shore up economic activity, even as headline inflation is easing. The Bank of Korea last month made its first rate cut since 2020 to 3.25%. It will meet for a policy decision next week. Well, Japan's overseas shipment expanded faster than expected in October, led by a pickup in chip equipment demand in China. Exports rose 3.1% on year, bouncing back from a fall in September that marked a 43-month low. In particular, sales to China were solid, while exports to the US and Europe declined. In the meantime, Japan's imports rose by a pace of 0.4% on year last month, also came in better than expected. As a result, Japan chalked up a widening trade deficit of $2.98 billion. And the positive figures are fueling hopes that Japan's economy can stay on the recovery path, with trade lending renewed support. But fears persist over potential US protectionist trade policies that could hamper future shipments. And Japanese businesses are weighing the impact of new and potentially hefty tariffs promised by US President-elect Donald Trump that could disrupt international trade. Well, shares in Japanese media conglomerate Kotokawa closed up 16% in Tokyo, continuing their rally from yesterday's dizzying 23% climb. And investor sentiment getting a boost from news of acquisition talks by Sony. And multiple media reports say that Sony is exploring a takeover of the media giant known for producing anime and publishing books, including manga comics. It also owns Tokyo-based From Software, the creator of the dark fantasy role-playing adventure game Elden Ring, which has sold 25 million units worldwide. The deal could bolster Sony's entertainment portfolio and give it an upper hand to becoming a big player in the anime market, which is set to double to $60 billion by 2030. Shares in Seven & I ended nearly 7% higher in Tokyo, following a report that the founding family of the retail giant aims to take the company private by the end of March. Public broadcaster NHK reported that the founding Ito family is working with Japan's largest lenders and major U.S. banks to raise more than $51 million for private buyout of the end of the fiscal year. And the operator of 7-Eleven convenience stores is caught in a three-way tug of war between the Ito family, company management, and Canada's Alimentation Couche-Tard. And the foreign firm had earlier bid $47 billion in what could have been the largest foreign takeover of a Japanese company. But Seven & I was reluctant of a foreign buyout. The offer came after the Japanese retailer's poor share performance and declining sales revenue over the year. Well, sharp rallies were also triggered in shares of Tokyo Gas after one of the world's most influential activist investors disclosed a major stake in the company. The stock ended the day nearly 13% higher. Elliott Management says it acquired 5.03% of Tokyo Gas, marking the highest stake the U.S. activist investor has ever bought in a Japanese company. Elliott says it may make, quote, important proposals to Japan's biggest city gas provider, which holds around 30% of the domestic market. Elliott reportedly believed that the utility firm should sell some assets from its real estate portfolio to improve its capital efficiency. Elliott has invested in a few Japanese companies between 2020 and 2023, including SoftBank and Toshiba. It has accelerated its activity this year by taking stakes in 3 other companies before Tokyo Gas, but this is the first time Elliott has bought more than a 5% stake in a Japanese firm. And Alibaba has raised $5 billion in a dual-currency bond, marking the largest deal of its kind in the Asia-Pacific this year. Alibaba intends to use the proceeds for general corporate purposes, including repayment of offshore debt. The company issued $2.65 billion of dollar notes in 3 parts and $2.35 billion worth of offshore yuan-denominated bonds. And the deal's order book peaked above $18 billion. The last time Alibaba sold standard dollar notes in public markets was in 2021. Experts say the time now is just right for borrowers to lap credit markets in China, as yield premiums on dollar securities have dropped to all-time lows. And that's after a blitz of monetary and fiscal stimulus measures by Chinese policymakers boosted the appeal of the region's debt. And the company's shares closed 0.59% lower in Hong Kong. And that's all for Business Joe. Back to you.
Henry, thank you so much for that. Coming up on East Asia tonight, we're bringing you some sports news. Japan has beaten China 3-1 in the World Cup qualifiers. We have all the reactions from both sides. China reaching far and wide on issues of cooperation as President Xi Jinping visits Brazil's capital for talks with his Brazilian counterpart. The two countries expected to sign agreements on various sectors, from trade to space. ASEAN defense ministers are gathering for a meeting in Vientiane at a time when maritime tensions with China remain at an all-time high. And China has slammed Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai, describing him as an agent and lackey for anti-China forces, as Lai takes a witness stand in Hong Kong for the first time in his foreign collusion trial. Let's turn to sports next with the latest from the 2026 World Cup Asian qualifiers. China's men suffered a 3-1 home defeat against Asia's top-ranked team, Japan, in Xiamen yesterday. The sides had last met in September when Japan's Samurai Blue thrashed the Chinese team 7-0 in Saitama. Some 45,000 fans gathered to watch the showdown between the two countries amid a long history of rivalry. Now, it took Japan 39 minutes to break the deadlock, Koki Ogawa sending the first goal in with a header in the first half. Ko Itakura took the chance to double the lead just as Koki Machida flicked on a pass from the corner. Chinese home fans grew hopeful when Lin Liangming scored early in the second half. But Ogawa snuffed out China's hopes of a comeback 6 minutes later with a third goal. The latest victory puts Japan on the brink of qualifying for its 8th straight World Cup, while China's football hopes remain alive in Group C. Well, we have so much more ahead, joined by CNA's Michio Ishida in Tokyo, as well as Lauren Ong in Beijing. Lauren, first to you. The pictures looked amazing. What was it like in the stadium?
Well, Jill, it was a sea of red in the stadium in Xiamen, which saw over 45,000 people in attendance. And the enthusiasm was so palpable that the China's coach actually said that it was the 12th man on the pitch. And on the Japan side, they said that it made it more difficult to play. And this is something that China and Japan has a somewhat uneasy relationship when it comes to sport, and even more so in history. And we saw these tensions sort of spill over in the match as well as beyond at the stadium. We have seen local media reports showing Chinese fans berating fan of Japan wearing a Japanese jersey, as well as a pitch invader that had patriotic slogans in Chinese. And there were even riot police on site. And all this comes amid heightened scrutiny on China's football team, as you mentioned, for the 7-0 loss to Japan in September. And ever since, it has been being berated on Chinese social media as well. And just to get a scale of how much this matters to Chinese spectators, we see on Chinese social media, Weibo, topics about the match were berated the top trending charts, and it took half of the top 15 trending spots. I spoke to some of the football fans earlier, and this was what they had to say.
尤其那个进球啊，我是觉得这几年都打，特别是打日本队，亚洲强队嘛，都没有好好的，都没有进球，这也算有一粒进球，我就觉得一雪前耻了，就让我们看到了希望。
那进个球还不错，没3-0这就不错了。我预测要日本的话，至少一个5-0，这是很正常的。
它是有提升的，但是我觉得还是有待提高嘛，因为我觉得中国足球的运动应该是咱们运动的底线，就是底线还可以往上提。
But all these reactions, they're kind of in stark contrast to the emotions and the tears that you see from the 7-0 loss in September. And we've seen, if these press conferences, post-match press conferences are any indication of the public sentiment, we saw the China's coach having calls for his resignation after that 7-0 loss. And right before last night's match, laughter erupted when one of the journalists asked him if he was confident that China can beat Japan. But after last night's match, the China's coach was greeted with applause from the journalists. So that's kind of a sense of what the Chinese side reaction is like. So I wonder what it is like for Japan. You know, what is the reactions to the result and to the behavior that some of these Chinese fans seems to be having to Japanese supporters?
Hi, Lauren. Well, there are several incidents that bothered Japanese fans and the team, as highlighted in Japanese media. There was loud booing when Japan's national anthem was played in the stadium, a laser beam witnessed towards Junya Ito and goalkeeper Zion Suzuki, a fan running loose in the pitch, disrupting the game. And despite the victory, manager Hajime Moriyasu of Japan was unhappy with the disrespect of fans booing during the national anthem, laser beamed towards his players, which he said was dangerous as it could injure the players. Now, I saw comments by Japanese fans on social media appalled by the lack of fair play and disrespect towards the game. There was a comment calling the game the worst quality ever. One point to note, though, comments I've seen on social media were not linked to history, territorial, or political rifts. Now, another issue that surprised Samurai Blue and Japanese media were the pitch was narrower than the suggested 68 meters by FIFA. It's by 1.5 meters on each side. And Japanese players were saying how surprised they were on how narrow the pitch was. And Lauren, my question to you is, has this fact of the pitch been reported by Chinese media? And if it has, what did they say? Also, what's next for China in the qualifier?
Well, Michio, there actually wasn't any of that sort. The main messaging from local state media was that they were looking at the silver lining despite the loss and saying that the performance the Chinese team put up was actually worthy of praise. And the focus is largely on, despite that it was tough going into this match, you know, Japan is Asia's #1 football team. And despite the optimism that has come up from the previous 2 wins in this qualifying round for China, it was always hard to defeat Japan. And even though China's football team hasn't always been the strongest, many in China still watch the sport. And indeed, even Chinese President Xi Jinping said he was a fan with hopes of a World Cup qualification. And the progress so far there has been progress so far, but the momentum is sort of disrupted with issues like money as well as corruption. And in the domestic league, which all of its national players are playing in. But still, experts say this 3-1 defeat does show some kind of improvement, especially with that one goal that the China team managed to put. And there is also calls for to meet the age-long benchmark, which is to have China qualify for the World Cup, something that it hasn't done since 2002. And with 4 more matches and 12 more points to offer, it's still possible. Now, if you were to take a look at the Group C standings, there are 4 more games to go, and the top 2 of this Group C, which Japan is currently at the top on, will automatically qualify for the World Cup, and the next best 2 can advance to the next round to battle it out for the last few spots.
All right, guys, as Lauren said, it's all about the points. Japan has won all the Group C games, so Michio, this must really put the wind in the sails of the Japanese team going forward.
Yes, certainly. Except for one game, Japan tied against Australia. Well, many football watchers here, including former national players, say today's Japan national team is the best ever. Many of the national players compete in Europe. For instance, Kaoru Mitoma is with Brighton, Daichi Kamada with Crystal Palace, Takefusa Kubo is with Real Sociedad in Spain. Koki Ogawa, who goaled twice yesterday versus China, plays in the Dutch league. And former national players also hail manager Hajime Moriyasu for trying out young players. Now, technically, football watchers here laud the improvement in set piece, the pre-planned formation for a goal, and that worked out well in the last game as well. Now, Samurai Blue needs one more win to qualify for FIFA World Cup 2026 with 4 games remaining. That will be its 8th consecutive World Cup finals if Japan makes it. Next, it plays Bahrain in March. In the previous game, Samurai Blue won 5-0.
Good stuff. Thank you to both of you. Michi Ishida is in Tokyo and Lauren Ong in Beijing. Coming up on East Asia tonight, climate conversations continue against the backdrop of UN-led COP29 talks. We'll be taking a look at just how much of an old aircraft can be recycled. Some European delegates at the G20 summit in Brazil, including German leader Olaf Scholz, have expressed regret that the meeting's official communique did not underscore Russia's responsibility for the Ukraine war. In a break with tradition, the leaders' declaration was published early amid reports that Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva rushed it out before a fragile consensus over the statement could unravel. Kate Fisher reports from Rio de Janeiro.
Brazilian President Lula da Silva had sought to keep his country's presidency of the G20 focused on social issues and sustainable development, things like his global alliance against hunger and poverty. But the wars in the Middle East and Ukraine have overshadowed this summit, even escalated during it, with US President Joe Biden changing a long-held US policy to allow Ukraine to use American long-range missiles to fire into Russia, and that causing the Kremlin to lower its threshold for using nuclear weapons. And that has caused a lot of conflict between the nations here, and they were unable to come to a consensus on what to say about the Ukraine war in their final communique, eventually asking and calling for peace, but not going as far as condemning Russia. That's something that upset several European members, including Germany.
Aber nun ist der 1000. Tag dieses furchtbaren Krieges. 1000 Tage, in denen der russische Präsident, in denen Putin die Ukraine gnadenlos bombardieren lässt. 1000 Tage, in denen Frauen, Kinder und Männer in der Ukraine sterben. Und 1000 Tage, in denen Menschen für den blinden Größenwahn, für die Absicht, sein Land einfach mit Gewalt zu vergrößern, leiden müssen. Das ist dann zu wenig, wenn die G20 keine deutlichen Worte zur Verantwortung Russlands in dieser Frage finden. Das hätte ich mir gerne anders gewünscht.
Trying to find consensus among this diverse group of countries has been tricky, and as the Brazilian leader handed the presidency of the G20 over to South Africa, he alluded to the fact that there was still much more to be achieved.
Mesmo ciente de que apenas arranhamos a superfície dos profundos desafios que o mundo tem que enfrentar.
South Africa will now be in charge of leading the G20 to face those challenges, which could be even harder to surmount with a new, famously isolationist president in the White House. Kate Fisher, CNA, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil.
Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong says the world must not abandon the rules-based multilateral order as countries focus more on domestic priorities. Speaking to Singapore media at the G20 summit in Brazil, he said such platforms remain vital for helping nations find common ground and emphasized it's crucial for Singapore to remain engaged and actively participate in such forums. Geraldine Yap with more from Rio de Janeiro.
As leaders gathered in Brazil for the annual G20 summit, questions arose about the relevance of the informal grouping in an era when nations are increasingly prioritizing domestic concerns and support for multilateralism is waning. Despite the increasing challenges in aligning interests, Singapore Prime Minister Lawrence Wong insists that nations must not give up on the pursuit of cooperation.
I think all the more important under such an environment for us to have more engagements, more opportunities to talk with one another, rather than to even abandon such platforms and end up with more misunderstanding and a higher risk of conflict and confrontations. It may not necessarily lead to consensus all the time, but still having that face-to-face engagements can help to at least get people to talk, understand one another's positions, and gradually take progressive steps forwards towards enlarging the common ground. And that's what I think G20 and other platforms play a useful role. From Singapore's point of view, participating in these platforms remains very important because it's better for us to have a seat on the table than not to have a seat at all.
Mr. Wong adds that through platforms like G20, Singapore can also get a sense of new developments and areas of cooperation and think about how to adapt and adjust to these new realities, even if it cannot get the best outcomes. The Prime Minister points out that Singapore needs to partner with like-minded countries to strengthen support for the multilateral trading system, especially within the World Trade Organization. At the same time, he highlights the need to think about how the WTO can be reformed and updated to better tackle the challenges of today's global trade environment. He acknowledges, however, that the world is entering what he terms an era of re-globalization, where trade flows are becoming more concentrated within specific regions, making groupings like ASEAN more important than ever.
We have to strengthen our own neighborhood. That's why ASEAN becomes important. And in our engagements with all the ASEAN leaders, everyone agrees we have to accelerate ASEAN integration during this new era. And we are working hard at different measures, whether it's on digital connectivity, green connectivity, power grid, payment system, all of these different ways which can bring ASEAN closer together and make ASEAN more competitive.
Now, Mr. Wong highlights that Singapore needs to strengthen its connections with various regions around the world, including the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America. The idea is to build relationships across different regional groupings so that no matter how global trade flows are shifting, Singapore and ASEAN can stay at the center of it all and continue to remain relevant in a changing landscape. Geraldine Yap, CNA, Rio de Janeiro.
There is big potential in the aviation circular economy. One industry report says the global commercial aircraft disassembling, dismantling and recycling market will be worth more than $14 billion by 2032, with a compounded annual growth rate of nearly 8%. As CNA's Roland Lim finds out, the technology is ever-changing to make the process more efficient and scalable.
In desert boneyards such as this one around the world, this is where old airplanes go to die. The International Air Transport Association says around 700 aircraft are retired each year, with 11,000 projected over the next decade. They may not ever take flight again, but their parts are getting a second lease of life. One Singapore startup has found a way to reclaim all the carbon fiber reinforced plastic, or CFRP, previously a challenge because it cannot be simply melted and reformed. Instead, Nandina REM uses a proprietary low-temperature solvent-based process.
The carbon fiber that we are recycling goes back into aircraft. We're currently closing a proof of concept of this with some of the world's leading cabin interior manufacturers. Like all materials that enter aviation supply chains, it's a very strong, rigorous process for material introduction. Importantly, the material performance is not compromised.
Reclaiming CFRP uses 70% less energy than making new carbon fibers. Most of the aluminium from aircraft also find its way back into planes and electric vehicles. And with jets and EVs sharing the same materials, Nandina is working with automakers to supply aluminium casings for their EV batteries and car bumpers. Estimates show that materials from retired aircraft could help produce more than 50 million EV batteries by 2030.
Nandina REM has successfully demonstrated proof of concept by dismantling 3 Boeing 767s. It is currently targeting 100 aircraft to be taken apart by the end of next year, primarily in Malaysia. The challenge is to hit enough volumes to garner support for more offtake agreements.
When we can secure the amount of feedstock to ensure the offtake agreements can be met, this is where we started to realize how we really unlock traction. Of course, working with key trading partners such as Sumitomo Corporation has been a very effective mechanism to deliver that as well.
Nandina, along with Sumitomo and Qantas, are part of the Aviation Circularity Consortium on a mission to accelerate supply chain decarbonization. They're working closely with original equipment manufacturers and regulators to develop a roadmap for certification of these reclaimed materials. Other airlines are also taking a multi-pronged approach to sustainable aviation. Dubai-based carrier Emirates has equipped pilots with the latest technology to optimize flight performance and fuel efficiency. It's also recycling its millions of plastic utensils used on board flights. And when Emirates embarked on the biggest ever fleet retrofit of nearly 200 jets, it decided to upcycle the leather and fabric seats to make customized backpacks and travel luggage. The initial line of products sold out in days, with all proceeds going to charity.
Currently, we are probably overwhelmed in the amount of demand that this interest has generated, but we're not really fazed by, in fact, this is music to our ears, we're not fazed by it all. We are to deliver and meet the demand. We are planning to recruit. In fact, we have already recruited up to 14 tailors, additional tailors. We are investing in a lot of the machinery that helps produce these products.
So far, Emirates has recovered more than 6,800 kilograms of leather and seat fabric. Next year, the carrier plans to go further and repurpose metals to use to make chairs for the office and to turn old escape slides into tents and umbrellas. A sustainable future for aviation may still be an uphill task, but these efforts show the destination is within sight. Roland Lim, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Before we go, a reminder of our top story. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in the capital of Brazil, Brasilia, fresh off a warm reception at the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. He is due to hold talks with his Brazilian counterpart, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Mr. Xi and his Brazilian counterpart are expected to sign agreements on a wide range of topics, from aerospace to energy. That's it for East Asia tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia. We're also on Facebook and YouTube. Bye for now.